All right, so today, let's dive into something like pretty fascinating, you know? It's about how our brains deal with this whole language thing. You ever get that feeling like you're on a different wavelength when you're talking to someone? Like you both get what the dictionary says, but the meaning, it's just not clicking.
No, I think we've all been there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that feeling of talking but not really connecting can be so frustrating.
Right. And this article, the one we're looking at today, it really made me rethink those moments, you know? It's by Chaimi Horrocks, and they talk about how there's this whole group of people, gestalt language processors, GLPs is what they call them, and how traditional linguistics might be missing something really important about them.
And what's fascinating is that Horrocks, who says they're a GLP themselves, they're not just talking about different communication styles, but about like a fundamentally different way of processing language on a neurological level even.
Okay, hold on, because now I'm really curious. What does it actually mean to be a gestalt language processor?
So Gestalt, it's about seeing the whole picture, the complete experience, not just the individual parts, right? It's like,
Yeah.
you know how a song can like evoke all these emotions. You don't focus on each individual note. You feel the whole melody, the impact of it all together.
Yeah, totally get that. Certain songs, they just hit me like that every time.
Exactly. Well, GLPs, they experience language in a similar way. Instead of like dissecting sentences, grammar rules, individual words, they process language in these emotionally resonant chunks or scripts, almost like they're tuned into the emotional essence, the feeling of what's being said, rather than just the strict definition of the words.
So it's less about analyzing all the nuts and bolts of language and more about feeling the impact of it, like a gut reaction almost.
That's a great way to put it. And it's totally different from what we call analytic language processors, ALPs. ALPs, they're like the linguists. They love breaking language down, the grammar, the structure, all of it.
Which actually, now that you mention it, that's how most of us are taught language in school, right?
Mm.
Learn the rules, the parts of speech, all that technical stuff.
Exactly. And this is where things get interesting because, like Horrocks points out, this whole emphasis on the ALP approach, it can be tough for GLPs.
Yeah.
Imagine growing up in a world that's always praising, knowing the grammar rules, but you're learning language completely differently by absorbing these emotionally charged chunks of meaning.
So it's almost like imagine being given a puzzle, but instead of individual pieces, you have these pre-assembled sections. You see the bigger picture intuitively, but explaining how you got there, it doesn't fit the official puzzle-solving rules. And that actually makes me think about those scripts Horrocks talks about. It's clearer now. Can you give an example? Like, what would a script be for a GLP?
Totally. Imagine a little kid. They're learning the phrase, "Can I have a cookie?"
Uh-huh.
They're not overthinking the words, right?
Mm.
For them, it's one unit of meaning desire, asking, and hopefully that sweet reward.
Yeah.
It's the feeling and the outcome, all wrapped up in those words.
So for a GLP, it's not about consciously thinking can plus I plus have. It's this understanding that those words in that order, they express a specific need.
Yes. And as they hear that phrase different places, their understanding of it, it grows and changes. They're not necessarily dissecting it, but building up this richer understanding over time.
Which is so different from how we usually think about learning language, right? With its emphasis on linear progression, mastering grammar, and this idea of GLPs learning in this non-linear, emotionally driven way, it made me think. Because it made me think about how quickly we label certain ways of learning as disabilities, you
Mm.
know? And Horrocks, they have some really interesting things to say about that.
And they do, yeah. Horrocks actually talks about being labeled with a specific learning disability in school themselves. And their point is, this happens way too often with GLPs. Like, instead of recognizing their unique way of processing language, they're told something's wrong with them.
Oh, wow. That's just heartbreaking, honestly. Because it's not about one way being better, right? It's about valuing how differently our brains work.
I couldn't agree more. And that's a huge point Horrocks makes. Like, when we ignore GLPs, we're not just missing their perspectives, we're buying into this narrow view of what language how it works in the world.
Okay, so let's make this real for our listeners, yeah? Because I think we've all had those moments where communication just feels off, even if we don't think of ourselves as GLPs, right? So what are some like practical things to remember when we're talking to someone, knowing they might be processing language differently in this way?
That's such a good question. One thing is, for GLPs, the emotional part of the conversation is just as important, maybe even more so than the literal words. So paying attention to tone, body language, all those nonverbal cues, that can make a huge difference.
See, that's so interesting because I feel like in some places, especially work, we're almost trained to hide those emotional cues, to be neutral, objective. But for a GLP, that might make it harder to connect, right?
Exactly. It's like speaking two different languages, even if the words are the same. And this is where that power threat meaning framework,
Yeah.
it becomes so relevant.
Oh, right. Because this isn't just about like individual styles. It's about how those styles play out with power, with systems that might favor certain ways of thinking, speaking.
Mhm.
For folks who are new, could you give us a little recap on the power threat meaning framework?
Of course. So the PPMF, it basically helps us get how experiences of power, or the lack of it, can shape our mental health, our well-being. So in the context of GLPs, imagine constantly being told, directly or not, that your way of learning, of using language, is wrong, not good enough.
It's like being told your puzzle solving method is wrong, even if you're getting to the same picture as everyone else.
Exactly. And over time, that gets to you. It can lead to self-doubt, anxiety about communicating, and even, yeah, contribute to those misdiagnoses that Horrocks talks about, unfortunately.
Which is why it's so crucial to be aware of these different ways of processing language, not just for, teachers, therapists, but all of us, right? Because you never know who you're talking to, how their brain is understanding the world.
I couldn't agree more. And there's real beauty in that diversity,
Mhm.
you know? GLPs, with their ability to process language in these holistic emotional ways, they bring something so valuable.
And one thing that really fascinated me in the article was how Horrocks talked about multilingualism for GLPs. It's not just knowing two, three languages, it's weaving them together
Yeah.
in this really unique way.
Oh, absolutely. Herrick's talks about not just switching between, but like blending them,
Mm.
using phrases, sounds, even the emotional tones from different languages in their scripts and gestalts, right?
Mm.
They're not keeping things separate. They're making something totally new.
Okay, I have to say, I am getting serious language envy right now. That sounds amazing. Do you have an example? Like, what might that actually sound like?
It is, yeah. It's hard to like give a specific example without, actually hearing it. But Herrick's mentions their own accent, I guess you'd call it. Like some people say they have a non-native accent, even though they grew up with English. It's like their brain, it was taking the music, the feeling from other languages and kind of like weaving it into their English.
So instead of an accent, it's more like a linguistic fingerprint, right? Their own blend of the languages they know, shaped by how they experience them.
Exactly. And that's what makes Horrocks' call for a more inclusive sociolinguistics so important. We can't really get how language works if we're only focused on correct grammar, standard, whatever, right? We need space for the GLPs, the poets, the people who mix it up, who hear the music in it.
It's like we're so busy checking if people are coloring inside the lines that we miss the amazing art they're making outside the
I
line.
love that. It shows how limited our ideas of fluency and all that can be. Imagine the creativity, the feeling, the whole new ways of seeing things that we'd miss if we don't open up to these other ways of experiencing language.
And that takes us back to that feeling we talked about at the start, right? Those times you just feel like you're not speaking the same language, even if you're using the same words. Maybe, just maybe, there's a GLP right there. Seeing the puzzle differently, feeling those emotional things we as ALPs might not even notice.
It's definitely possible. And what if, instead of thinking it's a communication breakdown, we got curious about it? Like, what if there are multiple right ways to understand, to react to what's being said?
It's about shifting from am I speaking right to am I connecting, really connecting. And I feel like if we can do that, if we can embrace all the ways our brains do language, it could open up this whole new world of understanding in ourselves and with each other.
It's a journey worth taking, that's for sure.
It really is. So, to everyone listening, we'd love to hear from you. Have you had those moments where you thought, wait, there's got to be more to this language thing? Maybe our chat today sparked something for you, or maybe it just, made you feel seen in something you already felt. Whatever it is, keep those conversations going, stay curious, and keep listening. You never know what amazing things you'll discover about language.